March, the month where we all gear up for St. Patrick's Day, a time where we celebrate Irish culture and St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland, by wearing green, listening to Dropkick Murphys, and drinking way too much green beer. St. Patrick is known for his exploits, like driving the snakes out of Ireland, teaching the concept of the Trinity using shamrocks, and turning an entire county of hecklers into werewolves. You heard right, St. Patrick is responsible for an entire county in Ireland going werewolf. But well before this non-Irish monk drove the non-existent snakes from the Emerald Island, werewolves were already part of Irish folklore and mythos. I'm Kit Ulf, and today we're going to be diving into Irish werewolf myths.
Garrett, quit it. You're going to start a howl.
I didn't start it.
So let's start way back in ancient Ireland. Before St. Patrick, there was the Fianna. These were bands of mercenaries, usually comprised of various young single men from around the county. During the winter, they were often hosted by the nobles of the land, but during the times between Beltane and Samhain, they would train in the ways of the warrior, living in the wilds and playing hurling. Basically, they're your average D&D party. Two of Ireland's famous folk heroes, Finn McCool and Cuchulainn, were both members of their respective Fianna. Because the Fianna lived in the wilds, the pre-Christian Irish would associate them with the supernatural. They were often described as having a canine or wolf motif. One such thing attributed to the Fianna was the practice of wolfing, or putting on wolf skins and whipping themselves up into a frenzy, which bears a lot of similarities to the practice of Ulfhednar, or wolf-coat berserkers of Norse lore. The Irish kingdom of Ossory, modern-day Kilkenny and Laois counties, had a mytho-history involving one such werewolf warrior, a man named Legnach Faelid. In the medieval book Fitness of Names, Legnach and his children would often transform into wolves and go hunting and raiding. The kings of Ossory would trace their lineage back to this werewolf warrior. Later depictions gave him and his children more of that man-eating aspect of werewolves, which seems to be tied to the church in England condemning the practice of the Fiannas, calling them unchristian. But the stories of Irish werewolves in Ossory wouldn't end with the wolving practices of the Fianna. An 11th century poem tells stories of men who would transform into wolves by entering into a sleep-like state where their souls would exit their bodies and promptly run off to do wolf stuff. The human bodies were said to be tied to the wolf body, to the point where injuries sustained by the wolf would show up on the human body. Later, a monk named Gerald of Wales would include an interesting werewolf story from Ossory in his book, The History and Topography of Ireland, which he wrote on a sightseeing post-invasion trip with the future King John of England. The story talks about an unnamed priest who came across a werewolf in the woods. Surprisingly, the werewolf starts talking about God. I mean, I'd be surprised too if a werewolf popped out of the woods and said, "Would you like to talk about our Lord and Savior as taught by St. Christopher?" Anyways, the werewolf begins to explain how the people of Ossory were cursed by St. Natalis to turn wolfy once every 7 years. He explains that his fellow werewolf is dying and that she needs her last rites. The priest is a bit reluctant, but when the male wolf drops the female wolf's head to show that indeed the female werewolf is human underneath, the priest goes ahead and goes along with the last rites. Later, a 13th century Norse work, The King's Mirror, would use this story as an inspiration to tell a story of our good old friend St. Patrick and how he turned a whole county into werewolves. So the story goes that while St. Patrick is going around doing this whole convert Ireland to Christianity thing, this one clan is so annoyed with him talking about Jesus that they decide to heckle him by starting a howl.
Garrett, quit it. You're going to start a howl.
I didn't start it.
So St. Patrick prays to God for some help, and God's answer is to zap them all furry. Now, instead of being wolfy with wolf brains, the story goes to say that they are wolf in body, human in brain. It's also a bit unclear as to whether they are werewolves once every 7 years or once for 7 years, but that's what happens when you remix a story. So let's raise a glass and toast your neighborhood werewolf to the true meaning of St. Patrick's Day, commemorating when St. Patrick turned a whole county into werewolves. Sláinte!